What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Friday, April 27th, 2018. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday, or as we say here locally, Pauhana Friday, end of the work week. We have got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with your comments, questions, observations, opinions, and so forth. And, of course, a reminder that, yes, in hour number 3, the lovely Lady Claire will be joining us with her unique perspective on the world. So let's get right on into it. Obviously, the big news today is that Kim Jong-un and Moon Jae-in met at the Peace House in Korea. There was a very formal stepping over of the demarcation line of Kim Jong-un to step into South Korea, because it's the first time this has happened in a long time. They were getting along really good. They're going to end the war officially. They haven't been fighting it for a long time. Going to be a big problem cleaning up that demilitarized zone with all the landmines. It's the most heavily land-mined area on Earth, and probably going to take specially developed equipment to just go on in there and swat all that stuff and let it blow on up there. Or they could take that idea from that James Bond movie, the giant space laser that just cooks them all off, or something like that. But obviously a very good sign. The gentlemen appear to be very relaxed and very friendly. They're talking about denuclearization. They're talking about reunification. And it appears to have gone off very well. And South Korea's foreign minister is out there saying that clearly credit goes to President Trump. Maybe, maybe not. I think we have to give credit to Moon Jae-in, who has always been in favor of the Sunshine reunification policy, and Kim Jong-un for being reasonable and saying there may be a better way to move forward than what we've been doing up until this point. Now, Ian Bremmer is out there saying that Trump should get the Nobel Peace Prize for ending the Korean War. And if he does, at least he did something to deserve it, unlike Barack Obama. And apparently the betting odds are already out there on who's going to win this year's Nobel Peace Prize. Kim Jong-un and Moon Jae-in are, as a pair, the odds are 4-6. Donald Trump alone, 10-1. Or they could issue a 3-way Nobel Peace Prize, which would certainly be very interesting. But obviously, very, very positive developments here. I don't think it's smart to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula, because the U.S. has a bad habit of whooping on anybody who doesn't have weapons of deterrence. But that's their decision to make, and nobody in power is listening to me anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Very interesting. A lot of symbolism that was going on here. And Kim Jong-un and Moon Jae-in planted a pine tree. Now, the pine tree is very symbolic to Koreans, and the leader's gesture was meant to represent the peace and prosperity that both countries envision for the future. And they basically had a pine tree that was first sown in 1953, the year the divided peninsula signed the armistice, which ended the hostilities of the Korean War, but did not officially end the war itself. The symbolism, however, was taken to a whole new level by people on Twitter, who pointed out that Moon Jae-in and Kim Jong-un's tree was much bigger than the little oak sapling planted by Emmanuel Macron and Donald Trump. So they're out there saying, you know, my tree bigger than yours. Apparently, Kim Jong-un does have a sense of humor, because during the ceremonies, he basically cracked a joke saying that he's going to stop waking up the South Korean president with missile tests. And so all in all, it went really well. And now people are asking, if the leaders of the two Koreas can meet, why can't those of Saudi Arabia and Iran and put that hostility down? This would be wonderful if this was the beginning of a trend of leaders of countries that have been set at each other's throat by U.S. intervention were to say, you know, let's just sit down and talk. All right, we're going to take a phone call here from Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, but Mike, what's on my mind is we're a welfare and a warfare state. So they need warfare to continue. If I want people to think about this. If everybody's not fighting on the planet, what happens to Lockheed Martin besides making like commercial aircraft, Boeing, Raytheon, all these other companies we never even heard about? They'll disappear. You know what I mean? So this is not over yet in North Korea, just like it's still not over yet in Syria. Because hey, did you notice? I watched the whole Kim Jong-il, when they went into the peace out. Did you notice he didn't use their pen? His sister handed his own pen because, they could slip him a Mickey a week later. He might die of a heart attack.
Yeah, that's very possible. Also, these pens are considered very valuable pieces of history. That's why if you see Donald Trump signing a notable bill, he'll have a whole tray of pens, and he does one letter with a pen and puts the pen back because those pens are given out as prizes. So that may have also been the issue. I want to step back here, though. When you're talking about companies like Lockheed and Boeing, they prefer the war business over the civilian business for a very simple reason. When they build a civilian passenger airliner, it's expected to work and work well for a very, very long time. And when they're building something for war, it only has to work once. And that's why they prefer the war business. It's a lot more money for a lot less product.
They can make so much other stuff. Remember Caterpillar? They were really sinking down. They were going to make water pumps. This was years and years ago. They were working on making water pumps. I mean, they can shift over to something else, but, they won't make as much money and give kickbacks to our politicians. But I mean, Mike, it's not over in North Korea because they want constant war. You know what I mean? They just want constant war. That's what feeds their machine.
Well, I understand that, but I think Korea has been put on a back burner following that call from Netanyahu to Trump after Trump said he wanted out of Syria. And all of a sudden, Trump started backing off on North Korea. He'd been talking, real tough, invasion, missile strikes and everything. And then all of a sudden, it kind of just faded. And today's meeting between the two Koreas is more than symbolic. They're talking reunification. And if they reunify, then the U.S. has no more reason to be in there. And yes, they'll try and go on in and destabilize this deal. The U.S. definitely didn't want this meeting to happen. Because they're very concerned that now the people of Korea are going to realize the U.S. has been the problem all along. But they've agreed to a lot of things. People who were separated by the Korean War, they're obviously very old by now. They're going to be allowed to get back together. There's going to be much more communication between North and South Korea, possibly commerce. And they're looking at a multi-year plan for reunification. And that gets North Korea what they want, which is access to the industrial base of South Korea. It gets South Korea what they want, which is access to the natural resources of North Korea and more labor force. And so it's going to work out well for them. I think the smartest thing that these two gentlemen could do is reunify Korea, agree to jointly rule it, and with equal shared power. Something like that, so nobody loses face. But keep the nuclear weapons, because sooner or later, as you say, the U.S. is going to find a way to get back in there and mess things up.
Mike, I would not give rid of my nuclear weapons for anything. You got them already. That means all of Korea is a nuclear state. That means they can kick the U.S. out now. What's the U.S. going to do about it if they're unified? They're a nuclear power. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that gets them a seat. That gets them a seat at the table of the great nations. And you don't have to have a war to profit from having nuclear weapons. There are subtle economic advantages. Not that South Korea needs them. They're turning into a manufacturing powerhouse like China is. And of course, China wants a reunified Korea so they can extend the one road, one belt down into South Korea and get those products rolling. This would be good for pretty much everybody except the U.S. war machine.
And Mike, I think the Nobel Peace Prize needs to go to Assad and Putin, because look at what they did in Syria to kick these jihadi terrorists out from the West. They need to get the Nobel Peace Prize. You know it's not going to happen, though.
No, it's not going to happen. I mean,
But
look, the Nobel Peace Prize Committee admitted that Obama's Nobel Peace Prize was politicked. They were just subjected to all kinds of pressure, and they said, you got to give it to Obama, even though he hasn't done anything. And of course, very odd, he got the Peace Prize. He turned out to be one of the most warmongering presidents in recent U.S. history.
And Mike, I got some breaking news. I don't know if you heard about the cream of the crop Russian fighters. 4 of them are in Syria now. It's the Su-35S.
Oh yeah.
And then there's 4 more, Mike, headed from Russia via Iran in the next few days. That'd be 8 Su-35s. That is the cream of the crop, Mike. More than a match for the F-22.
I would say, yeah, I would say so.
All right, thanks, Mike. Have a good show.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are rejoining the network. Now, Mattis is out there basically reversing Trump's policy, or Trump's stated intention to pull out of Syria, saying the U.S. is going to expand their role in Syria, and the expansion is in response to increased Islamic State offensives in the region. Well, who does ISIS work for? So you can see the scam going on. You know, the U.S. government calls up ISIS and says, we need an excuse to stay in Syria, start attacking some people. And that's what happens. So Mattis is saying we're not withdrawing. And then he went on to say a couple of really bizarre statements. He said the U.S. is not taking sides in the ongoing conflict in Syria. Now, that's ridiculous. They've been anti-Assad for the last 7 years. Mattis also went on to say there's no military solution possible in the Syrian civil war, meaning they understand they have not been able to defeat Syria in 7 years. And so he goes on to say we continue to support a diplomatic solution as part of the UN-led peace process. The flaw with that one is, of course, the United Nations has not given the United States a Security Council resolution to be in Syria in the first place. Mattis is just trying to come up with reasons why the U.S. still being in Syria after all this time is somehow a good thing. No, it isn't. It's a bad thing. It's bad for the Syrian people. It's bad for the American economy. It's bad for all those U.S. soldiers who are over there. The other day we were reporting on how a Russian strike on an ISIS location apparently killed some Americans. And the only reason the United States government is not responding to that is that would expose to the American people that Americans are working with ISIS. Remember that big PR propaganda campaign they had with those faked up beheading videos, you know, about how bad ISIS is and you've got to be scared of them? No, ISIS works for the U.S. government. Let's take another phone call. Zara in Germany, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, I'm Zahra, and I live in Germany for 3 years, but originally I'm from Iran. I'm a PhD student, and I have watched your TV show, and because my friend has just been introduced to me, and I wanted to tell you about Iran because I have never ever seen to what Iranian call you. But Iran is really different from the perspective of the media. It's really different. And of course, they have to stop the nuclear program based on the agreement. But it was for us. In reality, it was not a good. It was not a good agreement because they have stopped everything. But in the end, the economic situation, in the end, it will be collapsed because of the currency and everything. And also, each year they have brain drain from the country, like based on the statistics. They have 150,000 educated people that they are going to another country to continue their education or to find a job. This is another problem. But about how it works there, it's really dictatorship, of course, because of the regime. And people have, they can do whatever in their own privacy, but as long as you are not journalists, as long as you are not politicians, the government leave you alone. But as long as you are writing something on a newspaper, on a weblog, then the people will be in jail or in trouble. This is another problem, and also right now, all around my country is about the war, because Iraq, Turkey, Syria, and everywhere, just Iran is a little bit without any war right now, but Iran is completely not in peace in reality.
Yes.
But what is the next? Of course, that we still don't know. But about that, if you remember, we had the one ISI attack in Iran in parliament. It was less than 1 year before, and but the good things about this regime is they are putting and they are spending so much money about to have the high security. And not to let the ISI to come to the country, because after that you can never ever see have another ISI bombs. Of course, that also because of the borders with Iraq and with Turkey, they can come. Pakistan and Afghanistan, they can come to countries so easily, but they spend so much money not to let them inside. But of course, that we don't know about the future. Maybe it will happen again. And about the relationship with, not the relationship, but the conflict with Israel. Of course, that I have no idea about the Jewish, because there is a minority in Iran that they are living in Iran. Of course, that apparently they are in peace, but in reality they cannot be active, like in religion or in politics. Also, they have.
Now, wait a minute. I have an issue with some of the things that you're saying, because one of the world's longest continuing operating synagogues is in Iran, and there are Jewish politicians in the Iranian government, is my understanding on that.
Yeah.
Now, let's step on back here, because you covered a lot of territory, and I want to respond to some of the things you've said. First of all, we all know that Iran is keeping its word on the P5+1 deal. The IAEA has confirmed it over and over again. U.S. officials admit Iran is keeping its commitments under the agreement. The reason Iran's economy is in serious trouble is because the U.S. didn't keep their side of the bargain. They didn't rescind all of the sanctions. They rescinded a few of them to make things look good. Then Congress turned around and threw more sanctions onto your country. So right now, Iran is the victim of a U.S.-backed economic war, and that's what's leading to some of what you're describing there.
Yes, about the agreement, this is my perspective, that it doesn't matter what is inside, of course, because the USA is in power, and in the end, all the time we are victims. Just look at the history that we have. Before, we had a king for 35 years before, and at that moment, everything was fine until that Shah or king wanted to just put the price up for the oil, and then the U.S. started to just have to protest, to defend the protesting in Iran, and in the end, King had left the country. At that moment, there was an Iran Air that people could directly from Tehran to New York, but because also at that moment there was a good relationship. But in the end, the result was the same, because we are from the country is located in the place that we have the natural resources, we have a gas, oil, everything is inside the country. Of course, that we are the piece of meat for the USA. At the end, we will be victim in all the way that we are. No matter that we have the Islamic government or the king government, no matter that we have the relationship with USA, friend or enemy, no matter, because in the end, they want to take the advantage of the country and profit and everything. Just look at the Iraq. Right
okay,
now,
well,
Zara,
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah?
We're going to have to end the phone call. I need to do a commercial break and then come back with some news. But thank you for all the information and insight. Thank you for the phone call. We'll be back after these few words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And getting on back to the news, a lot of stuff going on out there, a lot of hostility. Now, getting on back to Syria, and by the way, with reference to the phone call we just had from the lady from Iran, we already know that Iran is essentially at heart a peaceful nation. They have not initiated a war of conquest against another country in over 200 years, and certainly not since the Iranian Revolution of 1979. It's not their nature. Now you look at contrast with the United States and Israel, which can't seem to go 6 months without bombing or drone striking somebody. Anyway, getting on back to it. The U.S. Military is still throwing a tantrum over the apparent jamming of U.S. EC-130's electronic warfare aircraft. And so what we're seeing is basically the U.S. electronic warfare aircraft is being whooped, presumably by the Russian electronic warfare systems. And the U.S. military is saying, that's not fair. They can't do that. Something odd, though, is going on within the U.S.-backed rebel groups. There's been a wave of mysterious murders and attacks going through Idlib and western Aleppo that seems to be targeting commanders of the Syrian Liberation Front, the emirs of An-Nusra, and supposedly all of these various groups signed a peace agreement on the cessation of hostilities, but now it looks like there's a sort of a rivalry emerging, and they're starting to kill off each other's leaders here. Now, the former head of Britain's Special Forces has basically stood up to Theresa May's claim that Assad was behind the chemical attack in Douma, saying what we've all been saying: why would Assad use chemical weapons? He's won the war. And we know what's going to happen. This guy's going to be attacked. There's a very interesting article over at Information Clearinghouse, The League of Assad-Loving Conspiracy Theorists. Insert ominous music here. And basically talking about that as more and more of the U.S. and British lies stand exposed for the world to see, they're resorting to smear attacks and character assassination. And anybody who questions the official story is declared an extremist, Russian troll, an arm of Russian propaganda, Assad lovers or Putin lovers. That's basically all they've got left to play with, because they can't prove any of their claims. They never had to before. The people of the United States and Great Britain were naive and trusting, but we aren't anymore. Those days are gone. Before we send our money and our children into yet another conflict, we demand proof what this war is really all about, that the person being targeted has really done what they're accused of doing. And absent that proof, we don't want to take part. We refuse. We absolutely do. Now, as you know, Russia has taken 17 witnesses from the Douma attack to the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. A lot of them have testified and been questioned. They're all telling exactly the same story. There was a building that was bombed with a conventional bomb, and people were suffering from dust inhalation. They were taken to the hospital. The white helmets came on in screaming, chemical attack, doused them all with water, shot a video, gave them some food, and left. And all of those patients were treated for dust inhalation and sent home. Nobody at the hospital saw a single case of any kind of chemical weapon. Meanwhile, of course, again, having nothing else to fall back on, the U.S., Britain, France, and their allies are out there saying, "Oh, it's a masquerade. It's obscene. They're just trying to keep the cover-up going here." All right, give us the proof. Now, this is a breaking story, and this is really going to nail it all. This came out of 12160.info. Apparently, there was a classified Pentagon report that has been leaked, and it confirms what we already know. The Obama administration created ISIS as a tool to overthrow Syria's President Assad. And we know that Secretary of State Hillary Clinton was funneling weapons and supplies to them. That consulate in Benghazi was the hub of a smuggling operation that was taking the weapons that had been used to topple Gaddafi in Libya and send them over to ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria to do that to Assad. So, yeah, one more confirmation. ISIS works for the U.S. government. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back after these words from our sponsors with more about the wars and more about science and more about all kinds of stuff today. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. So let's get on back to Donald Trump and Emmanuel Macron. And they just had their get-together at the White House. And it looks like the primary focus of Macron's mission was to discourage Donald Trump from pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal. But in the end, Macron appeared to back down and say that, yes, the deal does need to be changed. Macron was also there trying to protect French business interests with Iran. But the two are mutually exclusive. If the U.S. goes on sanctioning Iran, French businesses are going to be harmed. The problem here isn't Iran. It's the U.S. government's habit of just sanctioning anybody and everybody who won't do what the U.S. tells them to do. But Macron is sucking up to Donald Trump. He's been Trump and Macron are being compared to Bush and Blair, and we know how that worked out for everybody. Now, over at Sputnik News, they have an article saying that Trump is running Washington into a hole if he cancels the Iran deal. And yes, he is. It's going to send a message to other countries that you cannot trust a deal made with the U.S. government. And the U.S. government already has a serious credibility problem with the rest of the world. Now, apparently, Macron and Trump agreed that any new deal with Iran should seek to limit Iran's influence in the Middle East because, after all, Israel is supposed to be running all of that place. And Macron, apparently at the conclusion of this whole thing, said that he thought Trump would get rid of the deal on his own. Oddly, he said it was for domestic reasons. Like Trump may have been convinced the American people don't think the Iranian deal was a good idea. Certainly all of his advisors are saying that. But all the other countries that signed that deal, they think it's just great. Iran is totally in compliance with the P5+1. They are regularly inspected by IAEA. There are cameras mounted in all of the Iranian facilities that were connected with its nuclear power station. They're constantly being monitored from outside the country. It's the United States that violated the spirit of the deal. They only rolled back a few sanctions, not all of them, and then promptly Congress voted to throw more sanctions onto Iran. Now, German Chancellor Angela Merkel is visiting with Donald Trump today. And she is pushing for two things. She's trying to prevent a transatlantic trade war with Trump's tariffs, and she wants to save the Iran nuclear deal as well. And I can understand her concerns. This whole sanctions and wars and tariffs thing is causing a lot of harm to ordinary people around the world. The ultra-rich, they don't feel the pain of all these economic wars. It's ordinary working people who have to tighten their belts a little bit more. Now, SecDef Mattis is out there saying that the Pentagon's strategic thinking is now moving away from the war on terror and focusing on challenges by China and Russia. by which he means that the U.S. has whooped all the little tiny countries under the excuse of the war on terror, and now they're going after the peer military nations, China and Russia. And he's out there basically telling the Senate Armed Services Committee, the global situation is sobering. Russia is modernizing its full range of nuclear systems. And basically, he's asking for yet more money. They just got almost $700 billion to play with this year, but it's not enough. And they're out there saying, we need more money. We've got to counter Russia and China. And yes, we waste a lot of money and our weapons are a lot more expensive, but we have to have them. Article coming out of Russia Insider. U.S. significantly boosts offensive forces in the European Union, preps for war with Russia. And it's pointing out that while a lot of people are focused on Syria, we should be paying attention to other areas of potential conflict. And we're seeing this increase in the U.S. presence all over Europe. At the same time, they're talking about a Russia-U.S. summit, which is sending a mixed signal. Now, Donald Trump is out there, and he's also sending a mixed signal. He's talking about his tough stance on Russia, about nobody's been harsher on Russia than he has been. And I think Trump may need to realize that he was unduly harsh on Russia because of all of the detractors, the Russia-Trump collusion hoaxers that wanted to make him look like he wasn't aggressive enough. And so we went along with aggressive. So at the same time, he's saying if we manage to get along with Russia, it would be a good deal, not a bad one. So it's a mixed message going on here, where Trump is still trying to placate the Russia haters, but at the same time he's realizing that a new Cold War could easily bankrupt the United States the way the last one bankrupted the Soviet Union. Now, a senior Russian security official who participated in a recent security conference in Sochi basically said that a lot of the nations that showed up admitted they had come under pressure from the United States not to attend, that the U.S. was attempting to hinder international security cooperation. Well, of course, you want to keep your enemy divided and separated. So I understand why the U.S. was doing that, but again, it sends a very, very negative message to the rest of the world. Now, it looks like something big is going to be happening in Ukraine. And there are statements, provocations, conditions indicating the Ukrainian army will deal a massive blow to the Luhansk and Donetsk People's Republics in May. And remember, there's already been shelling into the or rather mortar attacks into the Donbass under NATO commanders. Ukrainian troops, but they're now under NATO commanders. And that does not bode well, because if there's a big mix-up in Ukraine next month, and NATO's in there, that brings us one step closer to a direct military confrontation with Russia. And I think that's a bad idea. I really do. Now, apparently, the U.S. government has a bad habit of championing some very questionable leaders, like the Shah of Iran, the dictator Pinochet, the Somoza, and they seem to have repeated that same mistake with Kiev, because under Poroshenko, the Kiev government is swinging toward Nazism. And apparently, the Education Department of the Western Ukrainian city of Lvov announced a painting contest for teenagers to commemorate local volunteers of the 1st Galatian Division, a Nazi SS fighting unit that committed atrocities against Jews and communists and pledged their allegiance to Adolf Hitler. And they're offering prizes for that kind of thing. So Mattis, again, is talking with Israel's Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman and says that there likely will be a conflict between Israel and Iran. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Now, we know that the U.S. has been wanting to go into Iran for a very long time. We all remember that video of John McCain dancing around the stage going, bomb, 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 bomb Iran, and he's grinning, thinks it's all very funny, drop bombs on people who have done nothing wrong to us. And I think what's shaping up now is knowing how war-weary the American people are, convincing us that we need to attack Iran is going to be a tough sell. So if they can get a dust-up going between Israel and Iran, then the sales pitch becomes easier. We must support our friend in the Middle East. Even though they struck first, we must support our good friend in the Middle East. And I think that's what they're aiming at. And of course, they're out there still screaming that Iran is the bad guy in the Middle East, that they're state sponsors of terror. And yet every time they find an actual terrorist, whether it's ISIS or Al-Qaeda or ISIL or IS or whatever, they turn it out they're working for the CIA. Okay, now over at Breitbart, they're running this story where Israel is claiming that Iran has more than 80,000 fighters in Syria. Horror of horrors, we must strike at Iran for this. And this comes just a day after Israel media was outed for a hoax in which they showed a satellite photo of an airport in Tehran and claimed it was an Iranian airbase in Syria. And so now they're out there saying, oh, Iran has all these fighters in Syria. So it looks like what Israel's getting ready to do is say, we have to attack Iran because all these Syrians, all these Iranians are in Syria. They're coming for our border. They want to take the Golan Heights away from us, and we can't let that happen. One of the problems for the people of Israel is their entire culture and education system and even their religion tends to basically raise them in this intense state of permanent paranoia and fear that the world is coming to get them. And when you're in that stage of fear, of paranoia, you can't think clearly. And that seems to be what's happening. Another protest at the fence between Israel and Gaza, so far 25 wounded. Nobody reported dead, but again, the total right now is 42 Palestinians have been killed, 5,511 were wounded. Not one Israeli has been harmed. And they're just coming out there with these excuses about why they're just shooting kids. You know, oh, they should have been in school. You know, or you know, we don't know that these children aren't terrorists in training. You know, we have to err on the side of caution that anybody who's, you know, along that fence could be a potential threat. And they use that same excuse to justify shooting all these journalists. Now, Human Rights Watch has basically denounced the demolition of Palestinian schools by orders of the Israeli authorities in the occupied West Banks. A lot of these schools are financed by foreign donations. And Human Rights Watch is saying that this demolition of Palestinian schools is part of a discriminatory planning system that basically amounts to a war crime. Now, Israel's excuse is these schools were built without an official permit, and therefore they're illegal constructions. The problem is that Israel refuses to issue building permits for schools in the West Bank. Moving over toward Asia, China is again talking tough. They're saying they will not permit Taiwan to be seen as a separate country. This sounds more like the launching of a propaganda campaign than an outright military takeover. But the two very often go hand in hand. Meanwhile, China has deployed the DF-26 intermediate-range ballistic missiles into service amid these ongoing drills near Taiwan. Now, this missile is nicknamed the Guam Killer for its ability to reach the U.S. naval base in the Pacific Ocean, both with a conventional or a nuclear warhead. So that's getting serious. Here's an article that came on out from Global Research up in Canada. They do a lot of really good work there, and it's simply asking the question, how many millions have been killed in America's post-9/11 wars? And they go down the list here, and they're saying numbers are hard to come by. Those are numbers that the U.S. doesn't want you to know about. But it's estimated about 2.4 million people were killed in Iraq, based on accepting the estimates of the 2006 Lancet study and the 2007 Opinion Research Business Survey. For Afghanistan, the estimate is 875,000 Afghans have been killed. And they point out that very often, when the UN goes on in with their Historical Verification Commission, they'll find that the death statistics are often seriously underreported, sometimes by as much as a factor of 20. Now, another study came on out and estimated that since the end of World War II, the United States government has killed 30 million people all over the world in their various interventions, police actions, whatever it is they want to call it this week. It's still a war. You're going into somebody else's country, you're shooting at people, you're taking their property. Now, there's another article that came on out. This is in Russia Insider. It's repeating something that we talked about, I think, last week, that Russia's current missile technology is basically obsoleting the U.S. Navy's frontline ships. And they're talking about how these $15 billion aircraft carriers look really impressive, and they do. They pull in here to Pearl Harbor every once in a while. But they're vulnerable to these new intelligent missiles. And as I've mentioned before, the big mistake the U.S. government has made, among many, is they have spent all this money basically refining the weapons that were used to fight World War II. Russia and China went outside the box, and they've been designing and building the weapons that will be used to fight World War III. I remember there was a story from, quite a few years ago where the Joint Chiefs called in one of the top Navy admirals and said, if there's a global war, what is the life expectancy of the aircraft carriers? And he said, about a week, 2 if you keep them in port, which was not what they wanted to hear. But the Navy is just as infatuated with the aircraft carrier today as they were with the battleships at the start of World War II. And they learned a very hard lesson. So it may repeat with the carriers. Another report we talked about earlier in the week, more numbers of smaller carriers are actually more cost effective and more militarily effective. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha America, welcome back to the show here, and getting on back to Syria and talking about missiles. A lot of observers are looking at this last missile strike into Syria and realizing that it is basically a tactical defeat for the United States. Apparently, less than 20% of the weapons actually hit their intended targets. About half of them fell out of the air due to technical problems, and the rest were shot down. Now, that's a lot of money to blow up 3 buildings, which turned out not to be chemical weapons facilities in the first place. So it's a huge, huge embarrassment for the United States, as was the one a year ago. So, do we really want to go to war against Russia or China with such expensive, poorly performing weapons? I think it's a bad idea. They don't listen to me, but I think it's a bad idea here. Now then, over at George Washington University, the Student Senate has passed a divestment resolution, and the vote was delayed a week because of threats to the safety of the members of the Student Senate coming from Israel supporters. It's an intimidation campaign. It's terrorism. Let's call it what it really is. It's terrorism. Under the USA Patriot Act, terrorism is defined as violence or the threat of violence to coerce a change in one's political point of view. That fits here perfectly. That's absolutely what's going on here. Now, we may see a repeat of what happened at that other university that voted to divest, where the university's chancellors just said, no, we're not going to go along with that. And I expect that will definitely happen, because our nation is ruled by Israel. And I don't like it. I'm pretty sure you don't like it. Now, a lot of people are still talking about James Comey having committed criminal espionage with the giving of these memos to that Harvard University professor, who turns out to have a clearance from the FBI. He, in turn, leaked them to the media. The memos contain classified information. This is clearly a Title VIII violation. Why is James Comey not in handcuffs? Oh, because like Hillary Clinton, he didn't mean to do wrong. But if you read Title 18, intent is not required. The specific section of Title 18 Comey has violated simply says taking classified materials out of their secure location and exposing them in an unsecure location. And that's exactly what he did. All right, we're going to take a break for station identification. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And a little bit of good news. The U.S. House Intelligence Committee has released a redacted, declassified version of their report on alleged Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election, which officially clears President Trump of any collusion. And the committee said basically there were some cases of poor judgment and ill-considered actions, both by the Trump and the Clinton campaign. All right, well, if we're talking about collusion, let's get back to that Uranium One deal. Something else that was also in that report confirms James Clapper lied about the dossier leaks to CNN. And basically, he did leak information about the Steele dossier and high-level government briefings about it to CNN. And apparently, he lied to Congress about the matter. So where is Clapper these days? Who's he working for now? I think we ought to take a look at that. The House report also backs the claim that FBI agents did not think Michael Flynn lied, despite his guilty plea. And it basically says the FBI agents did not detect any deception during Flynn's interview. The guy got railroaded. DC politics are very, very dirty. That's something I don't think Trump was really prepared to deal with, and still isn't dealing with very well, in my opinion. Now, Jeff Sessions is taking heat over his refusal to appoint a second special counsel to look into just how it is that Hillary Clinton was able to escape indictment over the multiple felony violations of Title 18 involving her email server. And his excuse is that these special counsels have to be handled carefully within the classic procedure and rules. And looking at the way the Mueller probe has taken on a life of its own, it's spun out of control. And that's why I don't want a second special counsel. Well, Mr. Sessions, it's your job to keep the Mueller probe under control and to keep it from just having a life of its own. That is your job. And if you're not going to do your job, I suggest you resign and try and find honest employment. Something else that's come on out, they're trying to make a big deal about it. I don't think it really is. But remember that lawyer, Natalia Valinitskaya, the Russian who was given special permission by Obama to enter the U.S. and meet with, I think it was Trump Jr., and it turned out all they ever talked about was the Magnitsky Act. And now they found out that she's an informant for the Russian government, which is not a big deal. All governments have informants. I mean, you should look at how many informants the U.S. has. The FBI has informants on every single college campus and most large corporations. They got them all over Hollywood. It's not that big a deal. Now, former Feinstein staffer raised $50 million and hired Fusion GPS and Christopher Steele right after the 2016 election. And they were hired specifically to push the anti-Trump Russian collusion narrative. And it turns out most of the money, about $50 million to fund this Trump-Russia hoax, came from just a handful of wealthy donors from Silicon Valley and New York. This was a setup from day one. And of course, Hillary Clinton's camp and the DNC also funded the dossier. And the dossier failed to put Hillary into the White House, and she's still steaming about that. Meanwhile, Nancy Pelosi is out there saying that she doesn't see anything inappropriate in rigging primaries. Well, that's a good reason for Pelosi to not be in Congress anymore if she doesn't understand that disenfranchising voters in your own party is wrong. Because it is. It's an attack on democracy itself. But Pelosi says, no, it's okay for us to rig the primaries. It's only one small step from there to say it's okay to rig the general election. We know what's best for the country. We can't trust those voters. They're all idiots and morons, and they'll vote for the wrong people. They'll vote for people who want an end to the wars, and they'll vote for people who want a healthy economy for the working class, and we can't allow that. Meanwhile, over at the Green Party, Jill Stein is saying that Russiagate is being exploited to repress leftist opposition, to silence dissent. Well, to an extent, it's not really working. Now, Trump, we're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Donald Trump is planning on visiting Great Britain to meet the Queen and Theresa May on July 13th, which happens to be a Friday for you superstitious Templar type people. But he's going to avoid London, which technically means this is not a state visit. But he is going to meet with the Queen probably at Balmoral or Windsor. And will also meet Theresa May. But the concern is there are going to be a lot of protests. The ordinary people of Great Britain are sick and tired of their country being the U.S. poodle, just as the American people are getting sick and tired of the U.S. being Israel's poodle. Now, Nancy Pelosi, along with out there saying that it's okay to rig the primaries, made an admission during a speech. She's confident the Democrats are going to take the House. And she has already said, when they take the House, they're going to pass an immediate amnesty for all the illegal immigrants, and they're going to go after the guns. Now, there are a couple of problems with that. First of all, the Senate would have to concur on the legislation, and Donald Trump would have to sign it. And I don't think either of those are going to happen. But for her to just come on out there and make that statement, that's going to turn a lot of Democratic voters off. Because a lot of Democrats are getting sick and tired of all this immigration nonsense. There's a lot of Democrats who are out of work, who can't find jobs, who are looking at all the freebies being given to the refugees and the illegal immigrants. People are starting to ask questions about AIPAC's $4.5 million support for Tom Cotton. And they're wondering, is he being groomed for some future role as Israel's puppet high up in the U.S. government? We're going to take...
Aloha, Michael. It's always good to talk to you. Michael, I kind of live in my own little world. I like to live in a post-Zionist world, and that it's not just the Jewish cartel that I don't want nothing to do with. It's the Christian Zionists who are in bed with them. I've had it with them. The Middle East means nothing to me. I want peace with Russia, even Europe. They can solve their own problems. Michael, there's some good news.
Yes.
I believe that our closest ally should be Mexico. Now, you might not agree with me, but I believe they should be. They're our neighbor. They're going to be here forever. I'm 57. They've built many of our homes. They've picked our vegetables and fruits. They've been the closest thing to a slave in my lifetime in this country. I've seen a lot. I've lived in California, Wife's Cuban. I've been to South Florida. I've seen it all. Nobody's ever outworked them. Good news. It looks like Trump might have he might renegotiate NAFTA. And the thing about us in Mexico is we have to work together. We have to work together and nurture our relations for the future, because Mexico's got a lot of problems and we do too. But we got to hang in there together, because Mexico is going to be we're going to be right and left arm of each other down the road. I see that coming.
Well, there's a couple of problems. Hang on. There's a couple of problems with what you're saying. Way back when the illegal immigrants were used as farm labor, that was the only thing available to them because of citizenship laws. And yes, they were forced to work very hard, and there was a lot of abuse of them. Today, where they're allowed to have driver's licenses and register to vote and everything else, they're not willing to go back to those fields. And they don't need to, because most crop harvesting these days is done by machine. And so that part of the economy falls apart. The reason I disagree with your getting closer to Mexico is because our economy cannot survive the continuing influx from Mexico. If we want to be fair with Mexico, we should implement exactly the same immigration laws that Mexico has. You can't just walk into Mexico, get a driver's license, be allowed to vote. You walk into Mexico without permission, you are going to jail.
Well, Michael, the average Mexican makes $5 a day. I don't know what the average wage here a day is. I assume it's at least 10 times that. But well, Mexico,
the Mexican people are going to have to fix that problem. They've got a corrupt government that's in bed with the drug cartels up to its neck. We've got problems in our own country. We have to fix those. And we have to stop thinking that we have any kind of an obligation to go into other countries and solve their problems for them. We don't. Okay,
Michael,
if Mexican workers are unhappy with what they're being paid, then they need to organize, form unions, go on strike, whatever it takes. If they're unhappy with their government, they have to deal with it. We need to protect our country, our economy, and our people. And that's just where...
Michael, I agree with you. I agree with you. I believe in the sovereignty of each country, but we have a $400 or $500 billion trade deficit with China. I would rather we had a massive deficit with Mexico in trade and not trade with China at all. China's halfway around the world. They're not part of our country. But Mexico, if Mexico had more wealth, then fewer of them would want to come up here.
Well, I understand that.
You know that.
I understand that. The problem is that China knows how to manufacture things and Mexico doesn't. And even though some American automakers are setting up car factories down there in Mexico, Mexico is a long way away from being anywhere near as industrialized as the U.S. or, for that matter, China or Taiwan or Japan. It's just not there. Anyway, thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go and switch over to Alex in Florida. Aloha, Alex. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Not much, Michael. I just wanted to say that Trump needs our support. There's a lot of people that call your station and they have problems with Trump, but what is the alternative solution? And so far, Trump's done great. Maybe he doesn't appoint people that you care for or that your callers care for. Maybe he says stuff he shouldn't say, but his actions are excellent so far. We have to give him an A+.
I have to disagree with you. I have to disagree with you. Trump has been a terrible disappointment to me. Well, first of all, he campaigned on a promise of ending these U.S. interventions in other countries, and instead, he's going back into Syria, dropping hints about going into Iran, talking about attacking North Korea. That's one major disappointment. The next one is, of course, he was talking about putting Hillary Clinton in jail and draining the swamp. He hasn't done that either. Now, that being said, he is the legally elected president of the United States of America, and while I do not support his decisions on the wars and everything, I am going to defend him against these very underhanded tactics that are being used to derail him.
Yeah, well, Michael, but you have to give him credit. His talk on North Korea is opposite of that. He's going to get the troops out of Syria. I promise you, in the next 2 months, the troops are coming out of Syria, and I think that we're going to have a denuclearization of Iran. And I just ask you and all your
Iran is already denuclearized. They never had nuclear weapons.
Hey, that was appeasement. The Obama administration gave them hundreds of billions of cash dollars that who knows who got kickbacks from that. That's a horrible deal. Did you read any of that deal?
Yes, I did read the deal. I did read the deal.
And what is it?
The deal.
What was the specific?
Alex, are you going to let me talk or not? The deal was very simple and straight.
So far, you're not saying anything.
All right. Thank you for the call, Alex. We're going to let you go. The P5+1 deal was very simple. Iran would suspend high-level enrichment. They were up to 20%. They weren't building any bombs with it. They were enriching primarily for their own nuclear power station, which is about 5 to 6%. Iran surrendered all of that. They send their uranium to other countries to be turned into fuel rods for their power stations. And in exchange, the United States was going to end all the sanctions against Iran. Iran has complied with every requirement of the P5+1 agreement. They allow IAEA inspections, something Israel will not, I might point out. There are TV cameras in all of the Iranian facilities that are monitored. They had to wait and see if Iran was going to keep its word. Well, that was back in 2015. It's now 2018. Iran is obviously keeping their word. The United States isn't. Because after they rescinded some symbolic sanctions, Congress turned around and hit Iran with back when Iran was under the Shah, they were pushing nuclear power. There were ads about, with the picture of the Shah of Iran, look who supports nuclear power. It was a good thing back then because Iran was under the control of the Shah, who was under control of the United States. Iran's nuclear technology only became an issue when the Shah got kicked out and Iran started running Iran. And that's when the U.S. started screaming about proliferation and everything. But everything Iran was doing at the time was allowed to it under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which Iran signed and ratified, and the U.S. signed and ratified. And the U.S. even reneged on that, because under the terms of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the U.S. was obligated to go in and help Iran build its peaceful uses of nuclear facilities, power stations, nuclear medicine facilities. And if you're really worried about Iran having a bomb factory under their power station like Israel has under Dimona, going on in and pouring the foundations and laying the pipes and wiring is a good way to satisfy yourself that it just did not happen. Okay. All right, I've got a couple more stories I want to get through before I go back to the phones here. So, I want to talk about Cambridge Analytica because everyone is talking about this and all the money they were getting from the Clinton campaign. But it turns out they're not the hot shots at manipulating the public you might think they are. Because in 2016, most of the candidates hired Cambridge Analytica, and it didn't work for them. And obviously, this attempt to use them to sell the Russia-Trump collusion story didn't work either. So their fame and reputation may be very much overblown. Meanwhile, the Democratic National Committee is shelling out more than $2 million for Hillary Clinton's campaign email list and voter data. So she's still making money off of that. All right, let's take two more phone calls. Miles in Maine, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Good afternoon. I just wanted to say your last two callers prove how important RBN is, so I hope people are donating. When people listen to RBN and a guy can come on and talk about we need to buddy up with the corrupt, ridiculously poverty-stricken nation like Mexico, somebody's not thinking clear. And then when you get the next guy on and he doesn't even know Iran has never had any nukes.
Yeah, okay. Miles, stay on the line. Miles, stay on the line. Got to put you on hold. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. I'm looking at Fox News, and apparently Trump has already come on out with a very negative view of the meeting between Kim Jong-un and Moon Jae-in, saying we're not going to be played on North Korea. So the U.S. is not happy that the two Koreas are moving together. All right, we're talking with Miles in Maine, and I think you wanted to talk about the economy.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Mike, too. I want to just mention on President Trump. Is he better than the alternative? Well, I think we all can agree on that, but he has really missed the mark on the bill of goods we were sold prior to the election, and I think that's a little comforting to all of us. We wanted what we thought we were going to get. And on the economy, I was going to ask you, isn't the figure something like to buy our way out of the Federal Reserve like $20 billion?
It's something like that. In this day and age, it's not a lot of money. Back when the Federal Reserve was first created and loaned that money to the U.S. government, which was desperately broke, that was a lot of money. But it's never going to happen because the financial community, the Federal Reserve, they're active donors to members of Congress. And members of Congress are going to basically sell the country out to whoever's handing them the biggest check.
Yeah, and that's such a real shame because being someone who's not an advocate of taxes and things like that, that would be the first tax. If they said this money's going to get us out of the Federal Reserve, I'd say I'll vote for that. So,
yes.
And one other thing, Michael, is Claire going to be on today, or is her back
she is.
aggravating her?
Well, her back is actually a little bit better. It's not all the way better. I still don't let her do the housework, but she's definitely feeling better, and she'll be joining us a little over half an hour from now.
That is great news. Well, thank you so much, Michael, and you have a great weekend.
All right, thanks an awful lot, and we're going to switch over to Roxanne in Texas. Aloha, Roxanne. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Good afternoon or morning for you, I guess. Anyway, Trump's team will never tell the public what they're up to, okay? They're going to give you, well, we're putting troops in, we're taking them out. And why would they ever tell anybody? This way he can look unhinged to the unknowing. Because the Duma story was made up by the White Helmets. They're MI5, 6. So that what happened, they went along with it. Trump and military went along with it. And I hear, or my sources say that Trump is working with Assad in Russia. So what we hear, without an award, isn't what you see. But anyway, so they went over to the Homs area in the northwest and over in the eastern, the desert area. That's where the strongholds of ISIS, which is they're controlled by SES, Serco, okay? And that's what they went and bombed or took out. And that's why all these tribal types or these mercenary groups are killing each other.
Well, the one problem with that is that the largest facility that was bombed has been identified as a medical laboratory. Because of sanctions, Syria cannot import cancer treatment drugs, so they're inventing their own, and apparently they've already come up with 3 very good ones, and that's what was in that building that got bombed. And there was the video interview showing the director of the lab just standing there in the wreckage saying, if there'd been chemical weapons here, we'd all be dead. When he was absolutely right about that. I just hope that they had the process for those cancer drugs backed up somewhere off-site. Otherwise, they've lost that, which, you know, is obviously good news.
I don't believe that story.
Which story?
I don't believe that at all. Just because they show you a bombed-out building and an actor standing in it doesn't mean that's what really took place.
No, the video also showed the lab equipment. The video showed the lab equipment that was all smashed up on the ground. And don't forget, Bill Clinton, when he was president, he blew up an aspirin factory in Sudan just to distract the media from Monica Lewinsky. And so we basically have to, at this point, we've been lied to so much. We have to go on the assumption that what is being said by the U.S. government is the lie, and the corporate media is the lie, but we can still give the benefit of the doubt to the people of Syria. Because, again, the U.S. basically had a tactical defeat with all these weapons that were sent in there. Anyway, Roxanne, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go.
I don't believe that either. Okay.
Okay, well, that's why I tell you, you shouldn't rely on belief to steer your minds, because that's how you get controlled. That's why they grab kids when they're very young, and they stick them in kindergarten, and they stick them in Sunday school to basically indoctrinate them with the beliefs around which their personalities will evolve as they grow older. And that set of beliefs, those are the handles that you can be controlled by. Beliefs are the chains used to enslave free minds. No chain of steel or iron ever bound a human being tighter than the chains made of our beliefs. And that's why I think beliefs are bad. I know some beliefs are harmless, Easter Bunny, Santa Claus. Some beliefs are bad because they can lead you to do things you otherwise would not do. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials, back with another phone call and more news after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to go back to the phones. James in Ohio. Aloha, James. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi. First of all, with regard to that caller who talked about Iran and who was very rude to you, I'm sure all your listeners agree that it's fine to respond in kind to that. But we appreciate that you're polite to people who disagree with you politely. Now, on Iran, there's a new series. It's British. I can't recall the name at the moment. I watched a few episodes. And the premise is that Iran has these nuclear scientists working overtime to come up in secret to come up with an atomic weapon. And, you know, I commented on it, and I was like, it's hilarious, the idea, because this would be an enormous spectacle that nobody could miss, whether by satellites or intelligence on the ground, which I'm sure the West has intel, and Israel has intel agents on the ground. Mm-hmm. Be an enormous industrial effort involving thousands of people.
Yes.
So the idea that Iran could make a nuclear weapon in secret is just not credible. One other thing I wanted to mention was I like for my my worldview to fit the facts, and so unlike a lot of people, when it becomes apparent to me that my worldview doesn't fit the facts, I change my worldview.
Yes.
So what's really been bothering me is the attacks by Islamists on Jews in Europe, and there's a Facebook group called They Can't, and they used to focus on shutting down critics of Zionism in the West, but they've had to stop because of all the death threats of Jews on their Facebook group, and they've concentrated on death threats to Jews by radical Islamists. So despite me being what you would classify as far right, it looks like the problem is actually the Jewish leadership. And if they had something other than AIPAC and the Southern Poverty Law Center and the Anti-Defamation League speaking for them, then they wouldn't. I don't think most rank and file Jews agree with the globalist far left agenda.
No, I agree with you. I'm hearing it from more and more people, Jewish people in the United States. They're very much turned off by what Israel is doing because due to Israel's trying to claim that it speaks for all of the world's Jews, then what Israel is doing reflects on all the world's Jews, and they really don't like it. They see it as actually making the world far more dangerous for them. Now, getting on back to this idea about Islamist death threats against these Zionists, you need to remember there's a lot of fraud that goes on when you're dealing with Israel. You know, all these stories about surviving the Holocaust where it turns out to be a hoax, the fake hate crimes left and right. Back in the 1930s, when the ADL was just getting started up, they were fundraising over the fact that there was a Nazi party inside the United States. And this Nazi party had a membership of about 6, but they got a lot of press coverage. ADL would go on out and say, the Nazis are here, we need your money. And then the leader of the American Nazi Party got arrested and convicted for embezzling from his employer, the Anti-Defamation League.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, anyway, my point is that in this new landscape of strange bedfellows, you know, Kanye West supporting Trump, etc., I can see, and Natalie Portman refusing to go to Israel to perform, I could see a future in which the alt-right becomes allied with the Jewish rank and file and the blacks who are like Kanye West, you know, united against the globalists. So,
there's definitely a pushback against the globalists. And you're right, the black community is having a serious rethink. In fact, a member just put up an article at whatreallyhappened.com where the Democrats are very concerned that they're losing control over the black community, and with that, the black vote. And without that, even all those illegal immigrant voters are not going to win them any elections. But I think the black community is starting to understand just how badly they were exploited with all this Black Lives Matter stuff in 2016. And I think they're having a rethink. And going into the midterm elections, there's another factor. Obviously, the embarrassment to the Democrats from Hillary, from Pelosi, may basically result in a lot of Democratic voters just not bothering. Voter turnout on the midterms tends to be much lower than the general election. Meanwhile, of course, the GOP is rallying to try and hang on to the House of Representatives. So we'll see what's going to happen. But my concern is that this election is going to be just as crooked as the one in 2016.
Yeah, one final note on this. Cesar Chavez, you know, the guy who, was it La Raza he founded?
Yes.
He was very much against illegal immigration because he realized that it hurt the legal immigrants.
Yes.
But anyway, that's all I have for you. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you very much for the phone call, and we're going to let you go. And yeah, that's another aspect about this illegal immigration, open border situation. The legal immigrants, the people who went through the system, who did it right, who complied with the law, they're very angry, first of all, that they're being lumped in with the illegals, and the social stigma, and second of all, because they did go through that very long, drawn-out process to become a citizen. And now the borders are just open. So it's making a lot of people very, very unhappy. Okay, let's talk about some economic news before Claire joins us. China is still a major consumer of gold, both by the Chinese government, which is acquiring gold the same as Russia, in advance of a collapse of the fiat currencies. But personal gold ownership is very popular in China as well, as it is in India. And right now, U.S. is exporting gold to Hong Kong, and it's at this point consuming nearly all of the domestic gold mine supply. Now, I'm sure somebody's making a lot of money on all of this, but there is an issue in that it appears some of the gold that was deposited by other countries in the New York Fed and the other gold depository there in New York, right across the street, may be missing. And you would think that these institutions would be trying to acquire gold themselves to make good on it, because more and more countries are starting to say, send our gold back. Okay, now, article coming out of Investment Watch blog pointing out the single greatest threat the markets present to investors is a lack of liquidity. And yes, that is an issue. Anytime that you have a liquidity crisis, the economy just starts to lock up. There isn't enough money in circulation for commerce to proceed. And it's not just affecting the investor class, it's affecting our entire society, where there's inadequate currency floating around to carry on with business. Now, we mentioned this briefly yesterday, but it's worth mentioning again. This is coming from conservative economist Arthur Laffer, and Stephen Moore, saying that it's estimated 800,000 people are going to leave the states of New York and California because of the high taxes. And of course, both those states are very liberal as well. Yet another Wells Fargo banking scandal. I mean, the ink isn't even dry on that $1 billion check that Wells Fargo wrote last week as a penalty to settle its previous scandal where they defrauded 570,000 clients in a car insurance scam. By the bank's own estimates, as many as 20,000 of those clients may have had their vehicles repossessed as a result of their inability to pay for the car insurance that Wells Fargo illegally stuck them with. And of course, November of last year, Wells Fargo came under fire for illegally repossessing vehicles owned by members of the military, which you're not supposed to do. Because if they're serving overseas, it's a little hard to make a car payment. And so there's a little slack cut there for them, which as it should be. Speaking of autos, another article is saying that auto sales are forecast to basically tank this month. We're just a few days away from the end of the month, and the numbers are coming on in, and the sales are way, way down. And this is coming from J.D. Powers and LMC Automotive. They're saying that basically the sales are down despite the heavy discounts offered by automakers. And these discounts are already at levels that industry analysts say are unsustainable and unhealthy in the long term. In other words, the automakers are not making enough money off the vehicles, selling them at these discounted prices to take care of their business, to do maintenance. In the long term, they could run out of money and they could go out of business. And sales are expected to drop further this year as interest rates rise. And more people are avoiding new cars because of the high interest payments and instead trying to find late model used cars, which is, of course, what Claire and I did. For some reason, over in China, their smartphone sales have collapsed. Biggest decline ever. I'm not sure if they're talking about the iPhone 10 or not. Now, over in Prague, there's this video. We've linked to it from whatreallyhappened.com. And apparently this waiter at an outdoor restaurant was beaten unconscious and put in the ICU by a bunch of culture enrichers. And it was a group of 7 men, refugees, who went into this restaurant in Vladislava Street, and they brought in their own alcohol. Well, most places don't allow you to do that. If you want alcohol, you buy it on the premises. The waiter came on over to tell them, gentlemen, you're not allowed to bring your own alcohol in here. The men just attacked him. They put him on the ground, and they just pummeled him. And he's in the ICU. He had to have surgery on his head, and the police are trying to find these guys. So how's that open borders refugee thing working out for you people here? apparently in a Dutch asylum center in Alkmaar, the refugees there are upset. They are very upset that they have to clean their own toilets. And apparently that's just not done. They're saying even Syria's prisons are better. I mean, that shows that there's definitely an issue. The people coming into Europe are coming in with a sense of entitlement. And we keep hearing that all of these NGOs were telling these refugees, if you get to Europe, you're going to get a free home, you're going to get free this, you get free cable, good parking, all these other things. Over in Greece's largest refugee camp, only 7% of the refugees are women and children. Now, the corporate media and the globalists and the open border people like to present this as we're taking care of these women and children who are coming out of these war zones. No, these are military-aged men who are coming out of these war zones. They're coming out of there with a bad attitude, as that situation in Prague and the Dutch asylum indicate. This is a disaster that is unfolding all across Europe and all across the United States. Now, speaking here of the United States, the annual cost of detaining an illegal alien is $46,654. That's more than the average American income. Now, Michael Barnier is out there laying down his latest warning, saying that the EU doesn't need London to prosper. And, well, if that's true, then just let Britain go. We know that that's a lie. We know that up to the present, Germany and Great Britain have borne the burden of the EU member states that are in serious economic trouble due to the predations of the European Central Bank. And that's one of the reasons they're fighting so hard to overturn Brexit and keep Britain enslaved to Brussels. Because if Great Britain succeeds in breaking free, and they're not sending money to Brussels. Remember, they were talking about a divorce payment. Yes, you can go be Great Britain, but you still got to send us the money. That's what's important. You got to send us the money. Germany will not be able to carry the burden alone. Now, over at TSB, they are in the midst of a major IT chaos, and it started with this IT upgrade, which shut down access to accounts, shut down the ATMs. Now, for some reason, the branch computers are seizing up. And there's a growing backlog of uncleared checks. And they're out there offering savers better savings rate to keep people from leaving, but I think TSB is in trouble. My question is, why was this software not fully tested before deployment? Now, Samsung is warning of slow demand for their flexible OLED screens. Right now, those are primarily used in the Apple iPhone X, and that's another indicator that the iPhone X sales are disappointing. And only one financial quarter after the device's launch, the sales numbers are headed down. And I can understand why. I'm seeing a lot of ads for the iPhone X all over, the various cell phone companies. They're trying to push them as hard as they can. But it's a $1,000 handset, and that facial recognition thing doesn't work all that well. There's no real substantial improvement between my current iPhone, which is a 7, and the iPhone X. I'm not going to spend that money for such a little improvement. I mean, back when the economy was healthy, when ordinary people had high-paying jobs, they could afford to have the latest and greatest of whatever to prove how good they were, to have that social status. Oh, you're still on the iPhone 8. I have the iPhone 10. That doesn't work any longer, not in this economy. Some of these corporations are slow picking up on that. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha America, welcome back to the show. And apparently Ohio State is now offering deportation defense classes. It's a real mess. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Lisa in Pennsylvania, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. I was wondering, I'm not sure if you got a chance to look at it or not, but if not, just what you think about it. That stupid DNC lawsuit, evidently they are, going forward with some lawsuit against the Trump administration for colluding with Russia, which we all know is a big lie, but Jimmy Dore did a report about it. I sent you the email, or I sent it to you in an email. Not sure if you got a chance to look, but maybe it might be a good thing because they'll have to prove that nothing went on.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
just wondering if you've heard anything else about it.
Yeah, it's already backfired on them. They've hoisted with their own petard. The DNC launched this lawsuit, and it looks like the only reason they did was so the corporate media could push the Trump-Russia collusion story one more time as if it was current events. But it's backfiring. They sued the Trump administration. They sued WikiLeaks. They sued a whole bunch of people. And the countersuits have started. And lawyers have already sent the DNC letters demanding that they preserve all of the evidence because the countersuits are going to say you need to prove that Russia hacked the DNC servers, because that's the main claim that is made in this lawsuit is Russia hacked the DNC servers. They gave the emails to WikiLeaks to help Donald Trump. That's the story that they are still pushing. But again, there are reasons to doubt the Russian hacking story. For one thing, the timestamps on the files are far too rapid for them to have pulled over the internet. They were copied to a flash drive by somebody inside the DNC and walked out the door, and most likely that was Seth Rich.
Yes, exactly, and that Veterans Intelligence Professionals for Sanity have, come out with that. And I was wondering, I forgot that WikiLeaks was involved in this too, that they want to sue WikiLeaks or whatever. It's just crazy. I got away from current events for 3 or 4 days. I just couldn't take it.
Yes.
And that Jimmy Dore video was the first thing I looked at. I was ready to scream. It was so upsetting to me. I just can't believe how much, I suppose we've been lied to for many years by the corporate media. I didn't realize the extent of it until this Russia saga.
Yeah. Again, there's nothing new about the government and media lying to us. It's just in the age of the independent media and the internet, people are now aware of it. And the government is still trying to play the game by the rules that worked in the Cold War, but they're outdated. They're as obsolete as the supercarriers.
Well, thank goodness. That's all I really wanted. I just wanted to see if you could shed any more light on it, or just at least let people know what's going on. It's ridiculous. But thank you for taking my call, and I hope you have a great weekend.
Well, thank you very much. We're going to let you go here. We're coming up on the top of the hour. And before we go to the break here, apparently Facebook is now admitting that they didn't read the terms and services of that app that improperly shared your data with Cambridge Analytica. They didn't even check it out. They just put it in the App Store. There's the music. We're going to take a break for station identification. Back with the lovely Lady Claire after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. And for those of you watching on YouTube, the gorgeous creature sitting to my side here is the lovely Lady Claire, who likes to join us on our third hour Fridays with her unique perspective on the world. So, lovely Lady Claire, what's the first thing you want to talk about?
The first thing I want to talk about is a very scary measles outbreak, 2 of them in Kansas. Now, the weird thing is, Mike, that these are happening. Kansas has a requirement for vaccinations. They can be turned away if the doctor says that there is some sort of threat to the life of a child. But how can these outbreaks be happening when the manufacturers of this vaccine say it's got a 97% success rate in making sure it doesn't happen? Doesn't that seem a little puzzling to you?
Well, it's very puzzling, especially when you realize how many of these measles outbreaks have erupted in vaccinated populations.
Yeah, that's what gets scary.
And again, it goes back to the use of attenuated pathogen vaccines because it's been found that the attenuated pathogen can revert to full potency after it's administered. They had that problem with one of the recent polio vaccines, and it triggered symptoms in people which were described as non-polio, non-specific paralysis to avoid lawsuits.
That's scary.
Yeah.
Whoa.
It is very, very scary.
Mm-hmm. And here we have yet another example of corporate owners and presidents, executives, having had their conscience surgically removed.
Well, absolutely here. I don't know if you caught this story earlier, but we were talking about these two Italian scientists who tested 44 of the most popular vaccines around the world and found all of them contaminated with nanoparticles of materials known to have neurological damaging effects. And the update on the story is they lost their funding, their homes were raided by the police, and all of their research was
gone,
confiscated.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's how they do it these days. But another example is in Australia. Ford.
Sorry to do this to you again.
That's okay.
Got sound issues.
Okay, better?
Better.
Okay. Ford in Australia was made to pay a $10 million penalty after finding the way it responded to consumer complaints about power shift transmission. And the Australian judiciary branded it completely unconscionable. And what they told drivers was that it wasn't the fault of the transmission. It was their own lousy driving that had caused this. You know, talk about chutzpah.
That's not something you want to tell your potential car customers.
And it included excessive clutch shudder, noisy transmissions, and excessive shuddering and jerking when accelerating. Now, 37% had at least one, count them, one clutch replacement. But Mr. Sims said that the company told consumers the issues were not its fault. Despite knowing that shuddering was a symptom of the quality issues with the vehicles, Ford frequently told customers that the shuddering was a result of the customer's driving style. And you know what I hate in all this? Nobody goes to jail. No one gets really rammed for making the decision, which fell downwards on the salespeople, not to tell the truth about what was going on. Nobody gets indicted. Nobody goes to prison.
See the same thing with commercial aircraft. Every time there's a plane crash, the aircraft manufacturer lobbies to say, "Oh, it was the pilot's fault. The airplane is fine. It was obviously pilot error." And then you find out it's things like exploding lithium batteries or badly programmed flight directors.
Or you've got stress, mental fatigue.
Well, that's
nasty.
Yeah. That also tracks back to cutting too many corners when you're building the original airframe.
Value engineering.
And not enough testing. And I think one of the problems with modern aircraft is they don't do as much real-world testing. They rely on their computer models, and sometimes that doesn't work.
Right.
There's actually one of Michael Crichton's book was called Airframe.
Right.
It'll never be made into a movie, but if you can hunt it down, like all Michael Crichton books, it's very well researched. It tells a very compelling story, but it also provides a look inside the world of commercial aviation and all the politicking that goes on in there as well. Okay.
Right. And I'd like to go to something again from Zero Hedge, which I commend as a very sober and fascinating blog. And it's called How Today's False Flag Operations Are Carried Out. Usually you are looking at a combination of intelligence agencies and non-government actors, including terrorist groups, but they are only considered successful if the true attribution of an action remains secret. There is nothing honorable about them, as their intention is to blame an innocent party for something it did not do. And there's been a lot of this kind of activity. And it's interesting, it was learned by a leak that the Central Intelligence Agency has developed a capability to mimic the internet fingerprints of other foreign intelligence agencies. That means that when the media is trumpeting news reports that the Russian or Chinese hacked into U.S. computers, it's probably didn't happen. And we've got a shout out going.
Yes, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And yeah, the CIA has an entire unit that is set up to carry out hacking attacks on computers around the world while posing as a third party, whether it's North Korea or Iran or Russia, and it's just another way of having a deception to start a war.
Yeah, and given that capability, there has been a lot of speculation in the independent media that it was actually the CIA which interfered with the 2016 national elections in the United States, making it look as though it might have been Russia.
Well, see, here's the point. The House committee just released their declassified version of their report and said they didn't find any evidence of it as well. The only claim that Russia interfered was the claim that they hacked the DNC servers, and there's reason to think that that is definitely a lie. Because, again, the timestamps on the files are too quick for the files to have been taken off over the internet.
Right.
But again, hacking the 2016 election, it did go on. We've got Pelosi out there saying that she doesn't see anything inappropriate about rigging the primary elections, which tells you a lot about what's going on in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
But the actual election machines, the tabulating machines, are not on the internet for the obvious reason. So if there was computerized rigging, it had to be done internal to the United States.
Right.
And I'm sure a lot of it was done. There's a lot of places in this country where the numbers don't match up. More votes than actual voters and so forth. I think nationwide there are 3.5 million more registered voters than there are American citizens. So you know something is very much off with that.
Yeah. And there are also all sorts of other false flag activities. And in the past 2 years, there were 2 major alleged chemical attacks carried out against Syrian civilians that resulted in Donald Trump and associates launching 160 cruise missiles, and that it was pretty clear from the beginning it was a false flag operation carried out by the rebels and the terrorist groups that controlled the affected area at the time.
Including the white helmets.
Yes, yes.
Who are apparently linked in with MI5.
Right. And the most recent reported attack on April 7th might not even have occurred at all, according to doctors and other witnesses who were actually in Duma, because the rebels succeeded in convincing much of the world that the Syrian government had carried out their attacks. One might consider their false flag effort to have been extremely successful.
I would disagree with that.
Yep.
Because most of the world doesn't believe an attack took place in Duma. We've got even people within government who are standing up and saying, wait a moment, this does not make sense. We were talking about the former head of British intelligence is directly confronting Theresa May and saying there was no reason for Assad to use a chemical weapon. He's won the war.
Right.
And again, the advice I give to people is if you're wondering if you're being lied to, look for what should be there and isn't.
Yeah.
And in both this recent chemical attack, which may not have happened, and the one before, the missing piece was a motive for Assad to do that, because he had no reason to do it. He's winning the war. He's won the war. Trump was talking about leaving Syria. He's still talking about leaving Syria, but having other regional forces come on in to continue the fight against the evil Assad. So Assad had no motive to do it.
No.
Obviously, the rebel groups had plenty of motive,
yes,
means, and opportunity to carry out this crime.
Yeah. And the article goes on to state that the remedy against false flag operations is to avoid taking the bait and waiting until a thorough and objective inspection of the evidence has taken place. And the U.S., Britain, and France did not do that, preferring instead to respond to hysterical press reports by doing something. And if the UN investigation of the alleged attack turns up nothing, it's a distinct possibility, which is already a foregone conclusion. It is unlikely that Britain, France, and the U.S. will apologize for having committed a war crime with the bombing of Syria.
No, they're never going to do that. When Bill Clinton bombed that aspirin factory in Sudan to distract the media from Monica Lewinsky, they paid the lawsuit to replace the building, but they never admitted that it was a mistake.
Or took responsibility.
This government maintains an illusion of governmental infallibility, like papal infallibility. No matter how wrong they are, they're never wrong.
Right. And the other major false flag that has recently surfaced is the alleged poisoning of Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia in Salisbury on March 4th. Now, Russia had no credible motive to carry out the attack and had, in fact, good reasons to not do that. And so there were massive allegations by British Prime Minister Theresa May about the claimed nerve agent being very likely Russian in origin, except Russia doesn't make this stuff.
No,
the U.S. and the
don't.
UK make it.
Yes,
hello.
The U.S. government has patents on this stuff.
Yeah. So let's look at the facts and all the facts. And now no one really believes that Russia actually carried out the poisoning. And there is a growing body of opinion to suggest that it was actually a false flag executed by the British government or even by the CIA. And very much paraphrasing what you just said, the lesson should be learned from Syria and Skripal, and that is that if an incident looks like it has no obvious motive behind it, there is a high probability that it is a false flag. And we need to avoid blaming people until we know what really happened.
Plug.
Yes. Over
at whatreallyhappened.com, we have an article where there's something like 60 acknowledged false flag attacks by governments that have come on out and said, yeah, we fooled you good here. We did this. And it's probably safe to assume that for every one of the admitted false flags, there are probably dozens and dozens that remain secret and classified to this very day. Right. And we also have an article breaking. There is a jihadi group or jihadi groups launching new assaults against Syrian army in North Hama. And clashes in multiple fronts of northwest Hama countryside re-erupted after jihadi rebels announced a new offensive against the Syrian forces, trying to duplicate a failed attack last month. Well, you know who sponsored them for this. I mean, it's no question. Of course. I don't know if you caught the story. Somebody leaked a Pentagon classified document saying that the Obama administration created ISIS.
Yeah. And speaking of which, the Pentagon is expecting a renewed push against ISIS in eastern Syria. And in the coming days, this operation has been on pause since Kurdish forces were deployed further west to resist the Turkish invasion. And the Syrian Kurds have not been doing a whole lot right now. And the U.S. mostly allows the YPG forces to handle fighting on the ground, providing air support. But finding ISIS forces in the desert may be a little difficult, as they've gone into hiding since offensives took the last of their towns in the area months ago.
And it's complicated now by this next story that you're talking about, where the Air Force planes in Syria are being blinded by what appears to be Russian electronic warfare. And again, we had that story earlier where a U.S. electronic warfare aircraft was overwhelmed and shut down by, we presume, a Russian electronic warfare system.
Right.
So they're years ahead of the United States in this kind of warfare. And the military is complaining that they're unable to distinguish friend from foe on the ground. And that makes it, it limits their ability to bomb.
Yeah, and Army General Tony Thomas called the electronic warfare environment in Syria the most aggressive on earth, and that adversaries are testing us every day, knocking out our communications and disabling the C-130s. These remarks were first reported by the website The Drive, coming on the heels of reports that Russian forces are jamming U.S. surveillance drones flying over Syria. And my question is, General Thomas, the question you have to ask is why? With all the money going to the military-industrial complex, that we're not even at the same level as the Russians right now, if not ahead of them.
Well, because the American military-industrial complex is all about making money.
Yeah.
And in Russia and China, their defense companies are under direct control of the government, and they're making weapons. They're making cost-effective weapons.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned earlier in the show, a major doctrinal error that has been made by the U.S. Defense Department for these many years is they're spending all this money on refining the weapons used to fight World War II, whereas China and Russia have focused on building the weapons that are being used to fight World War III.
Yeah.
And it raises the possibility that Russia was able to take over control of these Tomahawks and get them to land gently, which is why they were able to recover them. And they're going to take them back to Russia, have taken them back to Russia. They're going to be able to download and analyze all that software.
Yeah, reverse engineer.
And reverse engineer it, find out what the weaknesses in the Tomahawks are, although it appears they've already done that here.
Yes.
Okay.
Next subject I'd like to talk about. Nicaragua is teetering on the brink of a revolution, and the U.S. has pulled its diplomats. And this is the first time since the late 1970s. It apparently is on the brink of a revolution, as tens of thousands of protesters are thronging the streets of the capital, Managua, and a host of other towns to demand the resignation of President Daniel Ortega, a former left-wing dictator turned Democrat who led the Sandinistas during the Nicaraguan revolt. Ortega, who gave up power after losing an election in 1990, but remained a popular opposition figure, was elected president in 2006.
2006.
Yeah. And has been criticized for his autocratic rule, political repressions, and most recently for proposing Social Security reforms that would involve Nicaraguans paying more into the system while reducing payouts by 5%.
Now, there's an object lesson here because they're talking about the same thing here in the United States. Social Security has been looted and plundered, especially by Bill Clinton. The U.S. government has been embezzling the money of the American worker, and that's why Social Security is in trouble. The baby boomers are now retiring. The cash flow into Social Security is turning negative, and they're talking about raising Social Security taxes and cutting benefits. You old people, you're just living too long. Do the patriotic thing and die. And this one thing was the spark that has ignited what could be a revolution. And it's a reminder that we don't always know what the spark is going to be. We saw the same thing in Romania. 2 weeks before it all fell apart, if you were walking around Romania, you'd think everything was fine. And then there was a sporting event that turned into a spontaneous political rally. And 2 weeks later, Ceausescu was machine gunned to death on Romanian national television. Now, I don't want to see violence in the streets of America. I don't want to see blood all over the landscaping. But it could happen. You've heard it. We get a lot of people calling into the show saying we can't afford to wait for the system to collapse. And I'm trying to discourage them, but I'm running out of arguments. So it could actually happen here. So we just have to stay vigilant on that.
Yes.
Okay,
absolutely.
We're coming up here on another commercial break. When we come on in, when we come on back, Claire is going to be talking about, I guess, Iran is next on the list.
Yes.
A lot of stuff going on about Iran there. All right, so we're going to take a break, and we'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And yes, once again, we have to do the beg for donations. And Claire and I would get on our knees, but it would take a chain hoist to get us back up again.
Not good.
Not good. It's a very hard floor. We have one of these plastic things so the chairs can roll back and forth.
But the need is absolutely legitimate, folks.
It really is. So if you can help us, and we need your help right now, the big money is all on the side of the liars. I mean, look how much money was donated to launch this completely bogus Trump-Russia narrative. $50 million. And I know you all don't have $50 million, but whatever you have, every little bit helps. So if you can help Republic Broadcasting, the postal address to send a check or a money order, or if you prefer anonymity, cash, is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. The phone number, if you want to pledge to be a recurring subscriber, is 800-724-2719, extension 03. The network thanks you. Now, we're going to go to the phones here, and we're going to talk with Tom in Florida. Aloha, Tom. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Michael, what's on my mind is, did you see what's going on with the Breitbart where they said there's 2.5 million Latin Americans have been murdered since 2000 until now? In 18 years, there's been 2.5 million murders in Latin America.
I didn't see it, but I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, with all the wars between the drug cartels.
Yeah, and that's one figure. Another figure they had on Breitbart yesterday, Michael, is very interesting. Is the average person in this country makes $44,000 a year, but to incarcerate an illegal alien, unless he's a criminal murderer, if he's on death row, it costs $112,000. But if this is a regular alien in prison for a DUI or did a crime, it costs $45,780.
Yes, we talked about that earlier in the show.
Right, and yeah, that was just mind blowing to me. And about the $2.5 million, they also said that in the Middle East there was like 1.7 million murders over there. Well, and that was with terrorism. That wasn't domestic or whatever. That was just basically terrorism in the Middle East. But to see a figure where from 2000 till now, 2.5 million. That's unbelievable. That's worse than all the war. That's worse than World War I and World War II.
No, it isn't. I'm sorry to disappoint you.
Well,
I mean,
in some ways.
The total number of lives lost in World War II is estimated at 60 million. And we had a segment earlier in the program where we talked about estimates for the people killed in U.S. wars since 9/11, and it's something like 2 million in Iraq, 800,000 in Afghanistan. Another study is saying that since the end of World War II, U.S. wars on the rest of the world have killed an estimated 30 million people. So there's a lot of death out there.
No, right, Michael. You're right what you're saying, but what I meant to say is that's without a declared war, because those are countries that fight in countries. I'm talking about in all these what's going on over there. It's like inside their borders they're having all this crime. It's just like in Tijuana. You see, I don't know if you saw the figure about Tijuana.
Well, I didn't see the article that you're talking about here, but I wish to point out that not all of the U.S. wars since the end of World War II have been declared wars. They're called interventions. Some of them are covert. We're not supposed to know they ever happened. Remember what a surprise it was when we found out we had troops in Niger, in Africa? We don't know. I mean, the U.S. is currently acknowledging officially 7 wars are in progress. We don't know what other covert actions are underway. We know something's sure kicking up a fuss in Armenia right now.
Well, yeah, you're absolutely right, Michael. But, there's a war going on. Look at the media, what they're doing to Trump, and look at the Democrats. It's the biggest. I think I told you the other day, I saw the movie Chappaquiddick, and it's just like mind-blowing to me with how everybody's getting away with such. Nobody's being arrested for with Hillary or none of these people have been to jail. I don't think anybody's went to jail for all this treasonous activities. And it's just, and if you you go steal food out of a store, they'll put you right in jail.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. This nation was started as a nation of laws to which everybody was equally subject, up to and including the President of the United States. Today, it's obviously very different. There is a deep state, despite what James Comey is trying to claim on CNN.
Yes.
And yeah, there are the untouchables. Hillary proves that. Look, there is so much evidence for her collusion in the Uranium One deal, kickback schemes, pay for play, the email server scandal. Nobody's arrested her yet. And then they spend $50 million to try and gin up out of thin air this Trump-Russia collusion story. That's now falling apart. And so they're all now obsessed with Stormy Daniels, which I don't think they appreciate the optics on that, how bad that really looks to people.
Hey, Michael, one more thing. Hey, Bill Cosby. What was Bill Cosby on with that looking at that 6'5"? What was that? A basketball player or volley? What was that woman into?
I have no idea. Anyway, we're going to have to let you go, Tom. We got to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to go back to the phones to Mike in Chicago. Aloha, Mike. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. I was talking to an acquaintance of mine today, and the way I said, "Oh, so you're working? I know you're working tomorrow, and you're working Sunday." He said, "Yeah, I'll be working Sunday." I says, "Oh, yeah, what? Really early? Oh, yeah, 4 o'clock in the morning." Anyway, here's a guy that's working 7 days a week. Okay, and he's about, I'd say he's about 38 years old. And now, I couldn't say he's a millennial, okay, by any means. But my point here is, I said, that's great. I said, when you start to get my age, you're not going to be able to do it. I used to do it, but one thing I didn't tell him, and one thing I know, and I really wouldn't want to break his heart, is those dollars that he's working so hard for are being destroyed by inflation and the Federal Reserve and central banking. And I didn't want to tell him that, and I really wish when I was 20 years old, when gold was $200 an ounce, somebody sat me down and told me how this world works. It took me probably, and I'm embarrassed to say, it took me 50 years to figure this out, I would say maybe 40, 45 years, okay?
Okay.
But, when this hits home to you, how they're destroying labor, okay? The labor of the future that they're destroying. If people could grasp what's actually happening, and they're not just destroying labor and money, and they're destroying generations of people, like these millennials who took out these government loans at low interest rates, and frankly, I don't believe they're ever going to be able to pay them back. They're not buying houses. They're not buying cars. Okay, these people they destroyed probably one or two generations of people. I just read an article about that today.
Well, it's not like they intentionally did it. It's an epiphenomenon of their greed and rigging the system to bring them all this wealth. The United States was doomed all the way back in 1913 with the passage of the Federal Reserve Act. And we basically had a corrupted Congress and a corrupt president who sold the American people back into the same slavery, same predatory banking we fought the revolution to break free of.
And Michael, we're not, Mike, I think they're opening up these borders. I see people walking around. I feel like I'm in Afghanistan, and a lot of the people, the generations just ahead of me, and they're retiring now. They moved to the more south of the city I'm in, and I'm just seeing people like I say, I don't know if it's an agenda. They're opening these borders. What are we getting ready for? I mean, are we some kind of a real reset? I mean, and we talk about this all the time. I mean, for that to happen, there has to be a clash of civilization. One of these legs has to fall, and the other two have to duke it out. Is it going to be China? Is it going to be Islam? Is it going to be the West? Christian, the West, itself. How is Israel going to play into this?
Okay,
how is the Middle East?
Mike, the first thing you have to remember, there's not just one agenda. There are multiple overlapping agendas. There's the agenda of Wall Street, which is greed. There's the agenda of the globalists, which is one planet, one throne, one private central bank for all. They're behind the open border situation. The agenda for the wars are many and varied. Capture of natural resources, domination of transit ways and oil pipeline right-of-ways, and of course enriching the defense contractors. You need to get away from thinking that there's a single underlying plan behind all of this. There isn't. The world is in chaos, and that includes the movers and shakers as well. They're in a state of chaos. That's why they're fighting themselves so openly now, and that's a very bad thing. Because normally, up until recently, as bitter as the opposition would be inside government, as terrible as the infighting would be, it was always kept from the public so that they could present this image of a unified, smoothly functioning government. That doesn't exist anymore. The American people are watching a government that's clearly at war with itself.
Yeah, I agree. And, I think, I really wish, I see these young, I went on a walk this morning, and I walked by a grammar school, and I'm looking at these kids, and they don't even know what they're going to be faced with. I mean, they don't even understand what $1 trillion is. They're going through the earlier, you know, how they just go there. Well, you talked about it earlier about the school system. You know how you're taught to gravitate around the beliefs. I think you remember what I'm talking about,
Yes.
right? It was earlier the beliefs, you know, and when, you know, when the reality, I just, you know, like I said, when I was 20 years old, I wish somebody would have told me, or I wish I could have listened to your radio show, you know, RBN, and started to look up what's going on, because, you know, you want to save your money, you want to work hard, you want to have that spirit that this country is and was all about. But we're
Well,
you know, we're being
it's not
divided
about that anymore. I mean, when the country was first started, everybody had the freedom to improve their own lives through dint of hard work and wise and prudent planning. But the way the country works now under the Federal Reserve, it doesn't matter how hard you work, because all of the work product over and above your immediate survival is siphoned off one way or the other, either as taxes or as interest on the public currency. We've all been reduced to debt slaves. And I still...
agree.
Yeah. All right. Well, Mike...
I'm sorry, I agree. I'm sorry. I agree, because I remember gold went $5,000, 2008. You can look at it. Look at the chart.
Yes.
All right. And what is going to happen next time?
Well, we could be on the verge of a new dark ages. We're looking at the fall of the American Empire. And the parallels to the fall of the Roman Empire are clearly there. Some parts of the world will remain civilized. Our country would have to go through a transition into a new country like the Russian republics did. It's hard to prognosticate, but if we go into a global war and there is enough damage and destruction, even if we survive the nuclear exchanges, we're looking at the beginning of a new dark ages. It'll be 1,000 years before civilization is rebuilt to the level at which we see it today.
Oh, Michael, all I got to say to people is God help us, and if you got to believe that, you know, there is help, and I just pray and hope that doesn't happen.
All right. Well, Mike, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go here, and we're going to get back here to the lovely Lady Claire. And what is your next story?
Apparently, Mike Pompeo has made the observation. He was traveling overseas, and he said he believes that it's very unlikely that President Trump will keep the United States in the P5+1 nuclear deal with Iran past May 12th. This is more than insane, Michael. I mean, with the IAEA, the people there have these incredible CVs. They're very smart. And
Yes.
if they're telling the world Iran is complying, I would tend to respect and support those very bright people.
U.S. officials are admitting that Iran is keeping to the terms of the P5+1. It's the United States that didn't keep to all the terms of the agreement.
Yeah.
But the issue isn't whether Iran is in compliance with the P5+1. It's that Trump, meaning Israel, wants a new deal that would basically cripple Iran militarily and strip them not only of the potential for nuclear weapons, which they were never building, but they want Iran to surrender all of its long-range missiles. In other words, it's weapons of deterrence. In order to make them weak and helpless, in order to allow Israel to exert its hegemonic domination over the Middle East. And Israel is a master at playing all these Middle Eastern nations off of each other. And you would think that these Middle Eastern nations would remember back to the history of World War I, and following the decline of the Ottoman Empire, how Britain did exactly the same thing, constantly stirring up conflicts between these nations to keep them weak, to keep them at war, to keep them grinding up whatever weapons and supplies they had. It's a very dirty trick, and that's what Israel and the U.S. are doing to the Middle East and indeed to much of the world right now.
Right. I am very concerned about what is going to happen practically after the 12th of May. And I'm rather annoyed that they're doing it in my birthday month. That really ticks me off.
That's right. I have to buy you a birthday present like a weed whacker or something.
Something like that.
Something
yeah.
like that.
But,
electric dog policy.
Right, right. And where's the dog?
Okay. Well, that's Christmas.
Okay. But I'm just so concerned there has been a terrible escalation in a war of words between Iranian military commanders and Israel, which says that the current Iranian regime is in its last days.
Well, I seriously doubt that. Most of the rhetoric escalation is coming, of course, from Israel.
Yeah.
Israel wants Iran smashed as a regional power, and they're going to use the U.S. to do it because those Israeli children are way too precious to risk in a war with Iran. That's what the American Goyim are for. So America gets to pay for yet another war in yet another Middle Eastern nation that has done absolutely nothing wrong to us.
Like Iraq.
Like Iraq,
yeah,
which turned out not to have nuclear weapons.
Right.
It turned out Iran wasn't building nuclear weapons. It's again, I have to ask, how many more times are you going to have to be lied to before you're willing to stand up and say, this government is lying to us about everything, aided and abetted by the corporate media? Because that is the reality we're all living in right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And Israel's been making talks about shooting down the S-300 in Syria. The Russians aren't going to particularly like that. Call me silly.
That's not exactly what they said. For one thing, it's very difficult to shoot down a missile that's already in flight, although that's what the S-300 is designed to do.
Yeah.
No, Israel is talking about attacking the launch sites themselves and destroying them.
Ooh.
Now, of course, it's obviously a very well defended area.
Yeah, fortified, yeah.
To basically try and send in a missile or a bomb to an air defense site, it's very iffy. But Israel could just try and overwhelm it with a huge number of missiles and bombs, knowing that the American taxpayer will gladly buy them more to replace it all.
Yeah.
But again, Israel is out there trying to claim that they are threatened by Russia and Iran's presence in Syria. And they're starting to crank up that propaganda to try and say that Iran is the real enemy inside Syria. Even Breitbart got suckered in by this story that there are 80,000 Iranian forces in Syria, and they're coming down to take away the Golan Heights from Israel and all this other talk.
No.
And earlier in the week, of course, Israeli media got busted for that photo of the Tehran airport claiming it was an Iranian airbase inside Syria.
Oh, please.
So once again, lies, 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 lies. Let's go bomb and let's go kill them.
Yeah. I am hoping that things remain calm after the 12th of May. But I sure as heck wouldn't bet on it right now.
No, you're not going to see that happen. You're going to see the U.S. immediately throw more sanctions back onto Iran. Iran is already saying they'll restart their nuclear program. Russia's already, I think, building them a new nuclear power plant.
Right.
But Iran is also talking to China about their nuclear program, and they're not being very specific about that. So it may be that Iran feels at this point they have no choice but to pursue a nuclear weapon or nuclear weapons, obviously. And again, Iran is not in the habit of attacking other countries, but they have a legitimate right to defend themselves against the very obvious and present Israeli-U.S. aggressions.
I agree. I agree entirely. And besides, Tehran is on my bucket list.
Okay.
I don't think I can get there because American citizens can no longer travel to Iran, correct?
No, we can't. And a lot of places on this world I'd like to see, but looks like the wars are going to make it impossible. I've always wanted to see the Hermitage.
Yes.
And the rebuilt Amber Room.
Yeah,
that's not going to
St. Petersburg. No, I don't think so. Not anytime soon.
I wonder if Goskino needs a good visual effects expert.
Well, the only way to find out is to ask.
All right.
The next topic I have, apparently Gaza is about to explode. And this is being said by B'Tselem, which is an Israeli peace organization, and it is urging the United States and United Nations, as of yesterday, to do all in its power and its responsibility to protect unarmed demonstrators in Gaza one day after journalist Ahmad Abu Hussein died of injuries sustained while covering protests on 13 April.
Now, the UN will not be able to do anything because there'll be a Security Council resolution, and Nikki Haley will put on her cheerleader outfit and her pom-poms and go, veto, veto, veto.
Yeah, yeah. This sudden rush to the execution of reporters who are not throwing rocks or anything else. They're just reporting what's happening in these demonstrations is a very vicious turn.
Well, Israel is excusing this assault on the press by saying that they could have been terrorists merely dressed up as reporters, and they couldn't take the chance. And really, listening to Israel's rationales for just shooting all of these people, something like 400 Palestinians have been killed, 1,500 wounded, not one single Israeli injury.
Right.
You know, and again, this is as vile as the British massacre at Amritsar, India.
Yes.
And the world is turning against Israel on this. The PR is not getting any traction.
Yeah.
And it's resulted in a loss of support from Jewish people around the world. They don't want to be conflated with this obvious atrocity being committed by the government of Israel.
And a guy who died earlier was shot by an expanding bullet from hundreds of meters away.
Those are supposed to be illegal under international law.
Yeah, I was wondering about that.
Well, you know, the medics in Gaza have been saying the Israelis are using something that is causing massive injury for the caliber of the weapon. And we had some people who called on in and talked about these so-called varminting rounds that are where the bullet is hollow. It's got a plastic tip. When it hits the target, the tip shoves back and fans out the bullet. All right, we got to take another break for commercials. We'll be back with the last segment of our program after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, final segment of our Pauhana Friday broadcast with the lovely Lady Claire here. Next story, please.
Why Europe is afraid of China's new Silk Roads. Apparently, many European countries are concerned about one-way traffic along the new trade routes Beijing is trying to set up in Europe. And there was an article, a report of the 28 EU ambassadors in Beijing, 27, with the exception of Hungary, signed an internal report criticizing the new Silk Roads as a non-transparent threat to free trade, allegedly favoring unfair competition by Chinese conglomerates. Now this, yes.
There's a problem with that.
Yes.
First of all, the One Road, One Belt project is not one way.
No.
Okay. It's a two-way transportation system. What's going on here is the realization that Asian countries, primarily China, have turned themselves into manufacturing powerhouses.
Absolutely.
They're cranking out product that people want to buy. The European countries can't keep up because they, like the United States, have been imprudently investing their money in the machinery of war, which is used once and then go back and buy another. And so having basically lost the trade advantage to China, now they're going to stamp their feet and say China's not being fair. A lot of this has to do with the various shipping companies, container freight, tankers, who are realizing that they're going to lose a lot of business because once the One Belt, One Road project is up and running, getting cargo from China to Europe and back again is going to be much faster and much less expensive. And not as likely to sink. In fact, I read a stunning statistic of something like 10% of all containerized freight is actually lost at sea. In heavy weather, the chains will break and the cargo containers just topple off. It's a huge amount of loss. You're not going to have that on the Silk Road.
No.
But that's really what this is all about. China is building infrastructure to make their country better. Europe and the United States have spent the last 18 years investing in the machinery of war. And American manufacturing has been in decline for 30 years. Nobody wants our GMO agriculture.
No, definitely
The U.S.
not.
is in trouble because of decisions our government made, not because of anything China did. But this is, again, the opening to a war with China to basically knock them down, because that's how the U.S. does it. The U.S. government is actually anti-progress. They don't like it when other countries are doing things better than the United States. So what do they do? Do they invest in the U.S. regaining the lead in these manufacturing technology?
Nope.
No, they invest in the machinery to destroy those other countries so the U.S. can say, we're still on top. It actually reminds me of a sketch that was on the original Saturday Night Live with Steve Martin playing a caveman.
Okay.
You know, and he clubs the smarter caveman to death and then says, me now, smartest. That's the way the U.S. government is working. There's the music. Stay tuned for John Stadmiller, and I'm sure he's got lots of interesting things to say to you. Please take what you learn here. Share it with everyone that you know. Use email, person-to-person contact. Don't bother with the social media. It's heavily filtered. Nothing gets through there anymore. It's completely gone over to the dark side. So we'll be back on Monday. Aloha, America.